Re-Zero, Arc 8, Chapter 63, Upon these lips, I savor this miracle.
The moment he basked in the upward slice of the blade, for the first time in his life, nay, for the first time in all his time before and after death, Ugod Volikia resolved himself to taste defeat. It was the first time that somebody had crossed swords with him, contended with him as an equal, and to top it all off, secured a hard-fought victory against him. Although he admired that superb level of skill, the fact that he had been defeated in a decisive moment he ought not to have lost caused his chest, no longer containing a beating heart, to throb. That which he could have never possibly hoped to wish for was granted, but happening across Iris once again in this manner, he had yet to exchange many words with her. They had yet to touch each other. He had yet to fully convey his love. Even so, Ugod had been granted a reunion with Iris. In order for Ugod and Iris to be granted their desires, there were likely those who had been unable to exchange words, share touches, and convey their love to their beloved ones, even if they desired so. That same thing had happened to the alignment of the stars between Ugod and Iris. Indeed, exactly as he had expected. I'm still a complete amateur when it comes tar-wielding this katana, and even just a single swing drains so much energy out of me that I get a nasty sort of feeling from it. With thorns serving as proof of a curse dwelling in his chest, having delivered a blow with the fiend's sword enshrouded in sinister energy, the jet-black wolfman Halibel spoke so. That countenance of his reminded Ugod of a wolfman with whom he was once acquainted despite them not resembling each other in the slightest, aside from being of the same race. Within his recollections, Ugod felt like he, too, would sometimes gaze upon him with such eyes. Halibel, though, it's a blade you can't hate, since it does its job tar the fullest with the energy it goes and takes. Ignoring Ugod's deep emotions in that moment, Halibel continued. It was apparent that he had just given his impressions regarding the katana in his hand, the fiend's sword Murasame. But, the way he had put it made it sound a bit different from the fact that the power concealed in the fiend's sword simply proved useful in his victory. It was as if the fiend's sword had granted Halibel something greater than just victory. Ugod, the deluded conviction of the undead, ascertaining his body, which had basked in the slashing attack, Ugod put the sensation that he initially could not verbalize into words. Within Ugod, having been resurrected into the body of an undead, there was a certain kind of unreasonable obsession, an impulsive sense of hostility and violence appealing to his instincts, one directed towards the living of the Empire. In all likelihood, this was not limited to only Ugod. On top of that, Ugod had been keeping that intense impulse in check with his stronger feelings towards Iris. Even so, unable to go against the ringleader who had incited the resurrection, Ugod had no choice but to at least abide by their intentions, and had thus ended up crossing blades with the Hyenaman and Halibel here. That irresistible, overwhelming force of compulsion had vanished, as if it had been severed by the fiend's sword clad in a dark, sinister aura. It had vanished. Ugod, therefore, there is naught within mineself save thoughts of mine star. Placing a hand to her face, Ugod tenderly spoke to the woman who was both Iris and Yorna, and to this, Iris/Yorna lost the ability to speak, utterly entranced. His skin was neither pale nor cold, and his pupils were not those sham golden irises that were laid upon a sea of void, instead having taken on their characteristic blue hue. His facial muscles, which did not move irrespective of his status as an undead, yielded a serious expression which she recalled well. Unmistakably, this was the man that Iris/Yorna knew as Ugod Volikia. It's terrible to barge in here without any sort of permission. The reunion between these two was interrupted by a powerful, hoarse voice. Contrary to the contents of his words, raising his voice in a warm welcome to the sudden intruder, the undead swordsman, nay, the undead swordmaster, licked his lips with a glint in his eyes as he faced Ugod. Towards the undead swordmaster's gaze, Ugod's expression not wavering. Ugod, thou hast a most remarkable ability, alas, thou hast also erred in thy timing. Mine self wishes for naught but to spend mine limited time with mine star. Undead swordmaster, come on, there's no need to say something so chilly. Ugod imparted to him his wish with indifference, to which the undead swordmaster promptly turned a deaf ear. No, he tried to respond with a deaf ear, but he could not finish his reply. Stay away from us. For with that sharp scream, The small body held in Iris/Yorna's arms had spun, and the ice-getter-clad feet that flew furiously through the air had delivered a strong kick to the body of the undead swordmaster. Undead swordmaster, whoa! The undead used his sheath to counter the girl's kick, avoiding a direct hit as he took a step back. The impact was not entirely erased, but the undead swordmaster retorted with more joy than anger as his face split into a malicious smile. Taya. That malicious smile was crushed by the powerful blow of an ice hammer. This swooping blow from behind crushed him from head to toe, causing the individual known as the undead swordmaster to crumble into pieces. However, this did not mean there would be any rest. If they could have killed him this easily, the undead swordmaster would have already been felled 50 times. But, as always, the undead could revive as many times as they pleased. However, before they could deal with the undead swordmaster, Ugod, a strike imbued with emotions which one would expect to be unfound in a child. For the shining potential that thou possessest, mine self shall pardon thine rudeness. Stay away from Yorna Summer. Yorna, T. Tanza. His Excellency. What are you doing to His Excellency? Within the field of view of the screaming Iris/Yorna, the hilt of Ugod's yang sword collided with Tanza's getter composed of ice, creating a harsh shrieking noise. In order to protect Iris/Yorna, Tanza had kicked the undead swordmaster while in the air, but this undead had not been her only target. Rather, she also aimed for the unknown emperor who had suddenly intervened. As it was all so sudden, it was natural that Tanza could not distinguish Ugod as friend or foe. Yorna, still, you cannot do something like that so suddenly. Your Excellency, please excuse my Tanza. That girl holds no ill will. Ugod, wear not such a sorrow-stricken visage. Mine self loves any face which thou might wearest, though thoughts rise of scorning mine very heart which wishes to love thee even as thou entreatest mine self so earnestly. Yorna, he was this sort of person. Though Iris/Yorna wholeheartedly apologized on behalf of Tanza, Ugod's reply did not touch upon the core of the matter. This sort of thing had once been a daily occurrence with Ugod. Yes, back during those times with Ugod, this had been a daily occurrence. Tanza, Yorna Summer, squeezing, arms tightening around her in a hug, Tanza called out to Iris/Yorna to shake these arms away and once again jump towards Ugod. Tanza had not lost her composure and discernment that far. Whilst she did not understand their relationship, she understood that there was no animosity between Yorna/Iris and Ugod, and besides that, hey. Maybe it's a little too early for us to be taking our time to talk. Rushing over was Emilia, who had been fighting the undead swordmaster with Tanza. She mercilessly struck the undead from behind with her ice hammer, and while staring hard at Ugod who stood close to Tanza and Iris/Yorna with her amethyst eyes. Emilia, are you on our side? Ugod, verily, 'tis so. Emilia, thank goodness. You look really strong. Let me count on you. Ugod, understood. Leave everything to mineself. Having received an immediate response from Ugod, Emilia patted her chest in relief. Iris/Yorna's eyes twinkled at the way she had been able to discern friend from foe in an instant, but considering her circumstances as a half-elf, it would be presumptuous of her to speak about common sensibilities. Anyhow, Yorna, Your Excellency, that form. Ugod, alas, these are but embers that are yet to burn out. Yorna, even as he spoke that, Ugod did not take his eyes off of Iris/Yorna, nor did his expression contort into one of sadness or loneliness. Iris/Yorna also hoped that it would have been spoken thus, merciless it may be, and then, while looking directly at Iris/Yorna, Ugod continued, Ugod, however, for these few moments until it doth burn out, all of mineself is thine. Yorna, yes, Your Excellency. He did so, only to ensure that there would be no reason for Iris/Yorna to feel sad or lonely. This gentle king of thorns, who was feared by all, had always kept his heart pulsing with tranquility, so that his thorns would hurt none but himself. Yorna, not at all, not at all. It brings me such happiness. Although their time was limited, she could touch Ugod, and speak to him. Ever since those days had come to an end, it was something Iris had been unable to accomplish. And because of that failure, innumerable sacrifices had been made. For the sake of atoning for those mistakes and regrets, Iris had joined the Empire as Yorna. Swordmaster, that treasured sword in your hand, it's the Yang sword Volekya, ain't it? Suddenly, a hoarse voice that seemed to be restraining its zeal was heard, at which Iris/Yorna and the others looked up. At some distance from where the four had gathered, the figure of a singular undead slowly arose from the ground. In the same fashion, akin to insects emerging from underneath a large boulder, dominated by a repugnant obsession, the undead swordmasters began to appear one after the other. They were all alike, without individuality, and with perfectly synchronized movements and shining golden pupils. They smiled malevolently. Swordmaster, a legendary sword famous throughout the world, a magical tool forged by an unreasonable man, on par with the dream sword and fiend sword the spoiled brats got. Though I've seen it, I've rarely been blessed with the opportunity to exchange blows with it. Yorna, after going this far, has your warrior's spirit been stirred even further? Swordmaster, it's embarrassing. But you got it right. Those words had been glib, for he did not seem embarrassed in the slightest. That much was painfully obvious from the pairs of eyes that were glowing ever more radiant, and from the chilling heat of their malevolent smiles. Even when compared to the other undead, the undead swordmaster's fiendish aura and delusional state were clearly abnormal, which true strength put aside overwhelmed Iris/Yorna as she clenched her fists in shame. Those tightly clenched fists were gently embraced by the hands of Tanza from within her arms. You good, child, to grasp the hand of mine star thus, and to remain in her embrace, I shall permit it. Tanza, I shall continue to do so, even if I do not receive your permission. At Tanza's indignant tone, Yugud's sharp countenance remained undisturbed. However, Iris/Yorna could perceive that Yugud had accepted her reply positively. As Yugud continued to walk towards the seemingly endless stream of undead swordmasters that appeared to be increasing in number, 10 or 20 at a time, Emilia, with a tense expression on her face, attempted to join him. However, Yugud stopped Emilia with his gaze. Yugud, thy will to aid is honorable. Nevertheless, entrust this unto mine self, Emilia, but, you alone. Yugud Volekya, that is mine name. Emilia, Volekya. That's, Emilia, surprised upon hearing Yugud's family name, looked towards Iris/Yorna. Responding to her look with a nod, Iris/Yorna's eyes followed Yugud's back as he went forth. Yugud and the undead swordmaster, separated by a distance of about 10 meters, faced each other. Swordmaster, Yugud Volekya. Perhaps, are you the Emperor of the Briar? Yugud, never have I addressed myself as such, but there are those who have yclept myself so. Verily, a fitting phrase that doth succinctly depict mine tenure upon the imperial throne. It shall prove facile for inscribing in the annals of the future. Swordmaster, ha ha, ha ha ha. Ain't that a surprise? The strongest among all the emperors of the sacred Volekyan Empire. And to think I'd be able to meet such a person. As expected, I most definitely have it. With a lilt to his voice, the pressure of the undead swordmaster's aura of malicious swordsmanship increased all the more. Even though he knew that his opponent was Yugud Volekya, the Emperor of the Briar, the undead swordmaster was not horrified but instead inspired by unusual logic. The golden eyes of the undead swordmasters gleamed at Yugud and his yang sword. Swordmaster, if I can win against His Excellency the Emperor, could I have the yang sword? Yugud, if the sword deems it appropriate, so be it. But I shalt not surrender so easily. Swordmaster, ho, Yugud, many of mine subjects hath staked their lives to make the dream of wielding this sword in mine hand true. Only Iris/Yorna, who shared the joint rulership of Yugud's many subjects, could understand the passion of the gentle King of Thorns who was feared above all others. In front of Iris/Yorna who watched on, Yugud and the undead swordmasters moved simultaneously. Swordmaster, ha. With a short exhalation and lightning steps, their distance from each other was extinguished. 20 identical people were divided into 4 groups, and a flash of sword steel approached Yugud like a whirlwind. The barbaric act of an ordinary person assembling together first-class swordsmanship in order to reach a superb class. Emilia and Tanza gasped at the sword attacks that could be called a sword storm that surpassed the sword style. However, Iris/Yorna did not have a shred of doubt. 20 swords were coming at him. However, that exchange would end with one precise strike. The raging storm of swords from the undead swordmasters aimed at Yugad from all directions, but, before those blades could reach the King of Thorns, the brilliantly shining Yang sword flashed. It burned away all 20 blades that were approaching, and the crimson tip of the sword cleaved the neck of an undead swordmaster. Swordmaster, this power HK, his neck was gouged out, but even then, only the foremost one bore the fatal wound. The undead swordmaster grimaced as his remaining 19 selves, or rather, the flood of his other selves that reached him one by one, even though his blade had been severed. But, if one mistakenly thought their strength was that they could try again after dying, then, Yona, it has ended. The next moment, the undead swordmaster, whose whole body was cut, burst into flames. This spread to the other 19 undead swordmasters, and they were all at once swallowed by flames. Swordmaster, WHAA. In the hands of Yugad Volakia, the Yang sword ignited its true flame. The soul of the undead swordmaster who was hit by the slash was the spark from which the flame rose. Coincidentally, Vincent Volakia's Yang sword set the soul of the witch, Sphinx, the bearer of the great disaster, ablaze. It was the same conclusion. Swordmaster, Ka, Swordmaster, Ga, Swordmaster, U, burned by the tremendous flames. The undead swordmasters were burned to ashes one after another. Every time a burning individual perished, a new one was revived and replenished, but it too was engulfed by the flames. More and more, over and over without exception, he left more than a dozen of himself as charcoal, and the undead swordmaster looked down at his hands, which continued to be burned by the unquenchable flames, and then, Swordmaster, God damn it. Is this really where I meet my end? An indistinct voice spilled from his throat, burned by the flames, and the undead swordmaster grimaced. For a moment, this made one imagine this as a last-ditch effort made by one who could not admit defeat, but that worry was denied by the end of the undead swordmaster, who burned up and turned to charcoal. With his battered, crumpled hands reaching towards the heavens, the undead swordmaster disappeared. In the end, Tanza, he, didn't vanish. While witnessing the same thing, Tanza voiced her concern. As Iris/Yona took her hand in hers, she gave Tanza an answer to her fears by wrapping her small hand in her own free hand, assuring Tanza that it would be okay. Emilia, those people, were they all burned? Yugad, it is somewhat difficult to find the right word for it, but yes. The Yang sword's flame burns up whatever its owner desires. Souls are no exceptions. Emilia, I see. Thanks, that's really helpful. Even after expressing her gratitude, Emilia looked gloomily at the many remainders of the undead swordmasters that had burned up. Even though the opponent was undead, even though he was an opponent who used the characteristics of the undead in a sinister way, the fact that his life was lost shook Emilia's amethyst eyes. Iris/Yona once had the same feeling as Emilia. To think it was one of the things she had to let go of after living so many lives. However, there were some things she could not let go of. Yugad, O star of mine, called so once more, Iris/Yona faced Yugad directly. Resurrected as an undead, Yugad had been liberated from that abominable yoke. Both his refined features, beautiful and elegant, and his voice, which resounded in her chest far too much when compared to its actual volume, were a continuation of those days. However, there were also things that could not be explained by that alone. Yona, Your Excellency, the thorns are that which bound others, thrusting spikes into their hearts, the curse of thorns, isolating Yugad, and having served as the impetus of the special time that he and Iris shared together, it was something that still ensnared his soul even in death, a binding curse from which no refuge could be sought. At the current moment, it could not be felt. That went not only for Iris/Yona, but for Tanza and Emilia as well. That was to say, Yugad had been released from the curse of thorns. Yona, the curse, has it been dispelled? Yugad, that is not so. The curse of thorns yet remaineth intact. The curse hath been transferred to another, no longer doth it persist within mine self. Yona, transferred? Such a thing is possible? Yugad, that being made it possible. It be not something that could have ever been accomplished in the era of mine lifetime. Since then, the stream of time hath flowed, and many a wisdom hath come forth. A magnificent world, it is. Yugad Volikia had been released from the curse of thorns. Within Yugad's answer, as he quietly drew his chin, there was loaded a deep sense of admiration for the one who had accomplished that. Yorna, Your Excellency, the curse is. On the other hand, Iris/Yorna was left speechless by Yugad's reply. Although she understood that it was Yugad's nature to want to accurately represent that the curse of thorns ultimately had not disappeared, it was still a fulfillment of Iris and Yorna's dearest wish, for even if that was after his death, Yugad's soul had parted ways with the curse of thorns. Tanza, Yorna Summer, this person is. Yorna, Tanza, this gentleman is His Excellency the Emperor Yugad Volikia. A difficult individual, one who I am in love with. At Iris/Yorna's introduction, Tanza slightly widened her eyes. Then, she raised her face and exchanged glances with Yugad, and after a brief hesitation, Tanza, my name is Tanza. I serve as Yorna Summer's chamberlain. Yugad, is that so, Tanza? In the time of mine absence, mine star hath been in thy care. It is a great service. After Tanza timidly spoke so, Yugad nodded. A distance at which they could see each other's faces, a distance at which they could hear each other's voices, a distance at which they could make physical contact should they reach out their hands. At that distance, Yugad and Tanza had an exchange of words, even though, in the past, there had been nobody other than Iris who had been able to do that with Yugad without grimacing in pain. Emilia, I am Emilia, just Emilia. Yugad, will you continue to help us? As if riding off the deep emotion of Iris/Yorna, Emilia began to speak to Yugad without any hesitation. At her words, Yugad reclined his chin with a but of course, and, Yugad, the individual who hath released mineself from the thorns of prolonged torment. There is a duty Groovy Gumlet hath entrusted to mineself. I must act verily in his stead. Yorna, Groovy. That personage, released Your Excellency from the curse. Yugad, O star of mine. Yorna, why yes. Caught up on the name of Yugad's benefactor coming to light, she let out a voice akin to that of a village girl at the sudden call. That instant, the fact that the air given off by Yugad had become gentle seemed to be proof that he thought Iris/Yorna's reaction to be lovely, but she would not touch upon that. Only, as Yugad captured Iris and Yorna in the gaze of his blue eyes, Yugad, for thee, I wish to devote mine entirety. There existeth no lie in those words. Henceforth, Yorna, it goes without saying, but we shall be together. I refuse for us to be separated for even a moment longer. Until the very moment in which I am bereaved of you, I wish to hold this miracle upon my lips. This was Yorna's answer, bereft of falsehood, straight from the bottom of Iris's heart. The scorching scent of his soul assailed his nostrils. There was no sensation of pain. With his whole body engulfed in flames, the heat of being hideously burned was also akin to a gentle breeze. However, unable to break away from that gentle breeze, it reduced his newly created body to ash and cinders, attempting to put an end to his existence. Even if doused in water, the flames shan't fade. Even were he to try to spread the fire elsewhere, the flames shan't spread. Even were the point of flames genesis lopped off, the rest of his body would immediately be ignited by the inescapable flames of terminus. Indeed, this was his terminus. He had a feeling. He knew. This blaze shan't fade. Until he met his end, it shan't fade. Swordmaster, what the hell? Going so far as to descend to the body of an undead by his own blade, he had attempted to master the way of the sword, the flame of the Yang sword, which he had encountered upon his journey to reach the final destination of that path, burned the soul of Rowan Segment, the man who had a burning desire for the heavenly sword, attempting to scorch his entirety to naught. Refusing to remain in that place, Rowan fled the battlefield, and broke into a mad dash. His leg crumbled as he stepped forth, so if the next step would result in losing his entire lower half, he lopped off his own head as to not needlessly waste time, and thus the next step of his remains would be taken by his next self. Repeating this process, Rowan ran. He distanced himself from the Emperor of the Briar, in order to reach the place he was obliged to reach before he was burnt to a crisp. Rowan, what the hell? Just as expected, I have it. As embers emanated from all over his body, a vividly gruesome smile emerged on Rowan's face. Reduced to an undead, Rowan had become acutely aware of the state of his own soul, and had placed the tips of his toes upon the steps to reach the heavenly sword. In order to reliably take the next steps higher, this was his next trial. Indeed, Rowan's soul would be scorched to oblivion in the not-so-distant future. But the flame of a candle would always burn brightest right before it went out. For Rowan's segment, reaching the heavenly sword was his life's dearest wish. He had even proved that he would give up his life with no hesitation for that purpose. In truth, by experiencing death, and gaining awareness of the shape of his soul, Rowan had steadily gotten closer to achieving his wish. Thus, as long as Rowan reached the heavenly sword, it mattered not if it was only for a single second, for a mere second before his soul was burnt to a crisp, even if it was for naught more than an instant, all that mattered was that he reached it, and what was needed to achieve that? Oya oya oya, I had thought somebody was furiously dashing here, but to think it would be a flaming entrance. My now, if I do say so myself, isn't this quite the flashy production? An audible voice, the place he had wanted to reach before being burnt to nihil. Beholding the owner of that voice beyond his burning field of vision, Rowan thanked his karma. He had arrived at the place he had wanted to reach. All that remained was to reach it. Indeed, before Rowan, as he gave a burning grin, the boy, holding a brown-skinned girl in his arms, smiled. As irony would naturally have it, the boy gave a smile that resembled Rowan's own, and spoke. Boy, just now, you made me think this for the first time, Dad. I don't dislike it, rather, I quite like it, so he declared.